On July 21st, 2019, I gave a speech to a small, very small gathering in southwest London. In view of the hysteria currently being generated by the murder of Sarah Everard, I've expanded this somewhat. Feminists are quite cynically exploiting the death of this tragic young woman to push their ludicrous agenda, and once again they're targeting pornography. If you expect this to be controversial, I hope by the end of it, like me, you'll be wondering what all the fuss over pornography is about. None of what I say here is to be taken as a value judgment. With the necessary caveats, I am neither condemning nor condoning pornography. I'm simply telling you how things really are, as opposed to the way the likes of Harriet Wistrick, Vera Baird, Julie Bindel would have you believe they are. The word pornography is derived from the Greek and referred to writings about prostitutes, although today it is usually defined as sexual imagery, including the written word. In the West, pornography was generally considered sinful from a religious perspective, and in some quarters still is. Since the rise of second-wave feminism and the misnamed women's liberation, there's been an attack on pornography based on the mantra of it's degrading women. That mantra has been amplified by third-wave feminism, so now we read and hear all sorts of rubbish about it. I will add to these two entities a third, that is the police and the legal system generally, including the increasingly repressive organs of censorship. These people are control freaks, and often they go out of their way to make life difficult for certain categories of people, just because they can. Pornography, the people who produce it and the people who use it are easy targets, especially for the police. Unlike real criminals who might be armed and shoot back, there is no risk at all involved in making their lives miserable, although in the 1960s and 70s this resulted in detectives from the Obscene Publication Squad serving prison sentences for bribery and corruption. Like prohibition, the suppression of pornography leads to the undermining of the rule of law. The first point I need to make is that to talk about pornography is often misleading and can be outright dishonest. It's a bit like condemning vegetables. Most of us like 2 veg with our roast beef, but few of us would eat it with Japanese knotweed and nettles. In short, pornography is, or has become, a vast subject. It can be said to include everything from images of extreme sadism to smutty poems, pills to purge melancholy, to full frontal nudity, to stuff that frankly most people wouldn't consider pornographic at all. Here is a bawdy song from the 18th century.
One rude song sung on street corners and in taverns was "Put in all."
I hope my neck and breast, put in all, lie open to your chest, put in all. The young man was in heat, the maid did soundly sweat, a little further get, put in all, put in all.
They were not just explicit in terms of the words that were being expressed. They were explicit in terms of the actions that went with them. As female ballad singers lifted their skirts as illustrations for the kinds of content that many of the ballads contained.
According to her will, put in all, the young man tried his skill, put in all.
I think you could call that explicit. Regarding 20th and 21st century pornography, my personal favourite is the smoking fetish. Is there anything sexual about watching women smoke? Apparently some men think there is. In the 1930s, smoking had something of a romantic image, the 2 lovers smoking in the moonlight. But by the 1950s this had morphed into something sinister with film noir, the murder suspect being given a 3rd degree by detectives in a smoke-filled basement. What the enemies of pornography do is take one kind, which they brand evil or depraved, then stretch it to cover other kinds. We see this often in other fields, but here, for example, they will take child pornography, which is rightly illegal, then attempt to persuade us that a man ogling over page 3 of The Sun is the moral or legal equivalent. The sisterhood makes the blanket claim that pornography degrades women. Well, not all pornography involves women. There is a vast genre of homosexual pornography which doesn't involve women at all, and which has no attraction for them, so it is impossible to make out a case for suppressing it on these grounds. While men watch lesbian porn, women have no interest at all in watching men having sex with other men. Regarding homosexual pornography, I spent a few days surfing this, so you don't have to. Here are a few screen grabs, not particularly explicit, but if you take a gander at these, you'll understand what I mean. This sort of filth has no attraction for women at all, and yet somehow we're supposed to call it gay. Incidentally, there's an interesting twist here. In April 1984, Her Majesty's Customs and Excise raided a homosexual bookshop, Gay's the Word, seized an enormous quantity of titles. This was became known as Operation Tiger, or was called Operation Tiger. At this point, instead of condoning this act of whatever you want to call it, censorship, the loony left, instead of interpreting this as the state clamping down on sexual exploitation, this was seen as homophobia, an attack on gay and lesbian literature. And indeed, homosexual pornography, including lesbian pornography, is generally regarded by even most feminists as not taboo. This tends to indicate that hatred of men is their primary, and perhaps indeed their sole motive for this ludicrous hysteria about pornography. And then there was smut. Smut has been with us a long time. There was a Roman poet who was famous for it, Catullus. Bawdy limericks and songs such as Put in All can be considered pornographic, but do we really want to see those banned? What I would like to do is go right back to year dot, when our barely human ancestors came down from the trees. They were naked. That's one of my favourite expressions, that. When our barely human ancestors came down from the trees. They were likely a lot more hirsute than us, including the female of the species, but they were naked, and indeed we were always born naked, so nudity is something we hardly avoid. At some point our ancestors began wearing clothes, probably footwear first, for protection. Then they covered their genitalia. Women's breasts were probably covered in the first instance because of their tendency to droop. In some places, even today, in rural Africa for example, women walk around bare-breasted, totally unself-conscious. Then different societies began adopting and enforcing different dress codes. The strictest dress codes today are probably those of ultra-Orthodox Jews and Orthodox Muslims. But even England once had quite strict dress codes, as you will realise if you view photographs of bathers from the Victorian era. We still have dress codes today. A nurse or even a fast food worker is usually obliged to wear a uniform, if only a hat for reasons of food hygiene. Unlike us moderns, the ancient Greeks were totally unabashed and considered the human body to be an object of beauty, not necessarily in a sexual sense. Indeed, to this day, men's bodies as well as women's can be and are admired by both sexes out of aestheticism or envy, especially as we grow older. And we all like to be around attractive people as much as sociable ones. The Olympics were at one time performed in the nude, something that would be a genuine spectacle today, and from time immemorial, artists of all genres have depicted the naked human form. You surely recognise this, David. What about this? You recognise this? This is Minerva dressing. It was painted by Lavinia Fontana, arguably the most famous female artist of the Renaissance. Obviously you wouldn't expect to see this painting on a nursery wall, but you'd have to be sick in the head to call it pornographic. The subject of censorship, in especially films, goes way beyond anything pornographic, but 1953 saw the founding of Playboy magazine, which might be described as mildly pornographic in places. Then later we had far more explicit magazines, including Hustler in the United States and White House in the UK. The latter named provocatively after Mrs. Mary Whitehouse, who was a Christian Puritan rather than a feminist one. In fact, she was something of an anti-feminist. I actually met her once. If you're not familiar with her, Mrs. Whitehouse was a household name, if not an actual celebrity, in the 1970s when she successfully prosecuted Gay News for the blasphemous Kirkuk poem. They made a fool of herself by prosecuting the play The Romans in Britain. The feminist war against pornography involves something the left are fond of doing, playing semantic games, in particular altering the definitions of words and phrases to promote their agendas. So two second-wave feminists in particular came up with an anti-pornography ordinance which they intended to use to suppress pornography throughout the United States. They were Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin. Dworkin was a gratuitously repulsive woman. McKinnon, who unfortunately is still with us, is arguably the most evil woman who ever lived, if she is to be judged by her effects on social policy. They defined pornography as a form of sex discrimination, explicit subordination of women through pictures and or words, dehumanised as sexual objects, things or commodities, as enjoying humiliation or pain. They throw in rape and incest. Women are presented as sexual objects, tied up or cut up, or mutilated or bruised or physically hurt, and so on. Some of these morons even equate pornography with rape, which is a bit like portraying Shakespeare's Macbeth as actual murder. McKinnon and Dworkin tried out their censorship scheme with the Minneapolis Anti-Pornography Ordinance, which was approved by the city on December 30th, 1983. They tried this in Indianapolis as well, but in 1985 the Seventh Circuit put an end to their nonsense in American Booksellers Association Incorporated versus Hoodnut by ruling it unconstitutional. Sadly, we in Britain don't have a written constitution any more than we have free speech on a wide variety of subjects, especially viewed through a particularly narrow Overton window. If you're not familiar with the Overton window, this is the acceptable window of discourse. It's named after a bloke named Overton who was killed in a plane crash in 2003. And it's been moving steadily, or not so steadily, to the left for a long time, especially on race issues. Feminist fanatics like McKinnon were able to get away with this absurd portrayal of pornography because the industry was run by men, a big business, the patriarchy if you will, and women were said to be seen not simply as sex objects but as the mere playthings of men, powerless, as if. I should mention here the film Deep Throat. This takes us back to 1972. I haven't actually seen this film, but it became notorious. It starred a woman named Linda Lovelace. In the film she had a strange anatomical peculiarity. Deep Throat was a sex comedy. Not my type of film, but there was a classic sex comedy made a couple of years later called Flesh Gordon, which was hilarious. Deep Throat was a low-budget film that drew massive takings at the box office, but Lovelace was a one-trick pony and soon faded out. She went on to become a born-again Christian and campaigned against pornography. She made a number of claims against her then husband, Chuck Traynor, including his forcing her to prostitution and organising her gang rape. However, Linda Borman also starred, if that's a word, in a film with an unspeakable title, a film that involved a dog. I've met some depraved individuals in my nearly 65 years on this planet, but I've never met a woman who would even consider having sex with a dog. Linda Lovelace, stroke Linda Borman, was the daughter of a police officer, and she appears to have led a somewhat sheltered, sexually repressive life until she met her first husband, Chuck Trainer. Well, that is, if anything she wrote or said is to be believed. She denied making the bestiality film with a dog until she was properly outed. And the year before Deep Throat, she starred in a film about golden showers. And my personal view is that films or activities of this nature are in no way pornographic. They are simply utterly depraved. Returning to the present, there are two great ironies of the internet age as far as pornography is concerned. One is that in spite of censorship, there's never been so much pornography around as now, most of it online, and much of that totally free. The other is that far from enslaving women, as it were, pornography has empowered them, though not always in a good way. If you haven't heard of the Stiletto Goddess, she was Manchester housewife Tracy Seward, an internet dominatrix. Her fetish was crushing, if you can believe that. She had an international following, and when she decided to murder her lover, she had no difficulty in roping in a couple of suckers to do her dirty work. Philip Brearley was also the father of her 3 children, and there appears to be no real motive other than wanting him out of the way so she could continue her affair with her affluent and much younger Swiss lover. The victim was shot in the head with a gun that was smuggled from Switzerland. His body was then cut up, encased in concrete and dumped in the river. Seward and her helpers might have got away with it but for a lack of concern over his mysterious disappearance being a mite suspicious. There was also a lucky break in the form of an off-duty police officer who saw the body being dumped, although I didn't realise it at the time. As I said, this was a mother of 3. She was nearly 40, yet she was so empowered that she was able to brainwash 2 of her minions, brainwash them or whatever you want to call it, into committing an heinous act. Pornography, especially soft porn, also empowers less attractive women. A while ago I heard a vlogger complaining that at one time women who are overweight or downright ugly would hone their personalities to make up for their deficits of looks. But now, he said, some of these women get a few thousand or even a few hundred followers on Instagram and they become as conceited and obnoxious as any entitled princess. Other women working in the porn industry are empowered in less unsavoury ways. There are countless women who run their own websites, making custom videos for their clientele, writing their own scripts and even doing their own coding. There are a number of outfits which are run predominantly or even entirely by women. As I said, some of this, the fantasy stuff, girls dressing up with superheroine costumes and the like, I would hardly call pornographic, but it tends to be classified as such. There are Amazons, professional bodybuilders and the like, who tour the country or the world, giving one-on-one sessions with men, domination, female worship, that sort of thing. Some of these women continue into their 40s and 50s. Indeed, if you're of a certain vintage, like me, you may remember Cynthia Payne. She was a celebrity madam who ended up becoming an after-dinner speaker, and a minor celebrity in her own right. She died in 2015 at the age of 82. I don't think anyone ever called her an exploited or subservient woman. Finally, there was masses of amateur stuff out there, sex tapes and so on, including women making their own without men. This is neither an endorsement or a condemnation, merely an observation. So the bottom line is, when you hear people talking about the evils of pornography, saving women, protecting children, upholding our moral standards, look behind the rhetoric. What they want is to dictate what you read, see, and at times do. They know what is good for you better than you do, and they want to impose draconian laws to make you bow to their will. I have a 2-word answer for that, and I'm sure you know what it is.